Eli Turner spent only $500 to buy back an abandoned farm deep in the woods. But on the very first night, he heard footsteps upstairs right when he was certain he was the only one in the house. In the attic, a scrawled message read, "No one is allowed to stay." And in the basement, a line carved with fingernails declared, "We are still down here." So, who had once lived on that farm? And why was Maggie Harlow, the wealthiest woman in town, so desperate to silence him? Eli Turner came into Foster Hill on a Friday afternoon, carrying nothing but an old army rucksack, a worn-down pistol, and a stack of transfer papers stamped with the words, "Auctioned property, no returns. Price paid, $500. No maintenance contract, no legal guarantees, no inspection report." That was the point. Nobody asking questions, nobody watching over his shoulder, nobody needing to know who he really was. The house sat at the far end of a dirt road, swallowed by trees on three sides. On paper it was called an abandoned farm, but what Eli saw was a two-story wooden frame with a slanted roof, a broken porch, windows boarded shut, and a fence caved in piece by piece. Most folks would shake their heads and walk away. Eli looked at it and saw something just enough. Enough to start over, or enough to finish things if that's how it came down. He pushed the front door, and it gave way easy, the hinges long gone. Inside, the air was thick with dust, damp, and the kind of silence that feels permanent. No rats, no draft through the walls, nothing alive in there except the memories that stuck. He didn't bother hunting for a light switch. He knew there'd be no power. He just walked the first floor, mapping it in his head. Kitchen in the back, stairs leaning left, a small room with one window staring out at a bare field. Near the back was the basement door, nailed shut tight. He rolled out an old rug by the fireplace, used his rucksack for a pillow, and lay down without pulling off his boots. His back pressed against the wall, his hand near his sidearm. A man keeps the habits of sleeping near landmines. The wind slapped the boards outside, each hit sharp like a rifle bolt sliding home. He couldn't sleep, only closed his eyes and counted the beats in his chest. Near midnight, Eli sat up and pulled out his notebook. He scribbled one line. "First day no one showed. The house is quiet, but not empty." Next morning he started cleaning, not to make it livable, but to take control. He pushed away layers of dust, opened every drawer, checked the beams for holes, for stashed things, for signs of anyone hiding. Under the shell of an old refrigerator, he found a slip of paper pressed into the corner. A pharmacy receipt dated 1999. The name read, Esther Harlow. Eli folded it once, said nothing. He kept on cleaning, like he'd expected that name to find him sooner or later. By late afternoon, the light fell across the floor in a long yellow strip. Eli stepped onto the front porch and sat on the rotted wood. The field stretched empty in front of him, but what echoed in his head was the rattle of iron chains back in Fallujah, the sound of waiting without knowing what you're waiting for. When he finally rose to head inside, the back kitchen door swung open. No wind, no hand on the latch, just wide open, no sound. And at the edge of the basement steps, he saw it, fresh mud, 3 small footprints, wet, trailing straight down into the dark. The next morning, Eli woke early, curled up in that thin army blanket, his back aching from the old mattress laid out on the floor. Sunlight cut through the dusty cracks of the window, throwing a faint stripe across a floor littered with dirt and dried leaves. He sat up, pulled on his rough wool jacket, and padded barefoot into the kitchen. The house was dead quiet. No dripping pipes, no wood snapping from the cold, just silence, thick as damp sawdust. He started cleaning from what passed for a living room or more, truthfully, the middle room where the fireplace sat cold and dead after years unused. Under the layer of dust he uncovered a low shelf, a handful of hardback books gone moldy, their titles too faded to make out. With gloves on, he scraped through piles of junk, tin cans, bits of cardboard, until he came across a tin box wedged between 2 beams. Inside were a few old letters, one envelope torn at the corner, stamped faintly with Braxton County, 1999. Eli lowered himself to the floor and eased each sheet out. The handwriting, once blue ink, was soft and shaky, like someone trying to hold back their own fear. One line read, "We tried, but the well water still makes the girl sick. If they don't answer by this week, I'm leaving. No name, no address." Another said, "If anyone finds this, please don't let them bury the story again." Eli looked up, his pulse slowing. Outside the window, the wind rose suddenly. Maybe it was the words. Maybe it was the way they had been hidden so carefully. But he felt it sharp and plain. Someone had cried out for help here, and no one answered. He moved down the hall and opened the first door on the left. A child's bedroom, a small wooden bed shoved against the wall, crayon sketches still smeared on plaster, a horse drawn in shaky lines. Under the bed sat a fabric box. Inside was a one-eyed rag doll and a small notebook wrapped in plastic. On the first page, Hannah, grade 3, Miss Porter's class. Eli froze, like he'd taken a bullet to the back of the neck. That name, Hannah, wasn't on any of the auction papers. No official owner was listed. But here, in every tiny detail, the scribbles, the handwriting, the toys, was proof that a family had once lived here, loved, studied, gotten sick. And then, they were gone. He carried on to the kitchen. Old as it was, it still bore traces of life. A child's cup with rabbits on it, a sugar jar scraped to the bottom. By the sink hung a small apron, printed with strawberries. People don't leave things like that behind, not unless they had to run. He opened the back door leading toward the chicken coop. The wind hit him hard. The smell of earth, of old droppings, and something else, something sharp, like disinfectant. On the wooden floor was a dry stain stretched out in a warped shape. Eli crouched, touched the edge with his fingertip. Dry, a little sticky, not water, not oil. That night, Eli sat alone at the upstairs window, looking out at a backyard swallowed by weeds. In his hand he held one of the old letters, the yellow beam of his flashlight shaking shadows across the cracked wall. What he felt now wasn't just curiosity, it was duty. That old weight on his shoulders again, the soldier's weight. From the boards above, near the stairwell leading to the attic, came the sound. Thud, 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 3 solid knocks, like the heel of a boot pacing the hallway just behind him. The town sat about 10 miles from the farm, a scatter of houses tucked under the slope of a hill, with nothing more than a gas station, a grocery store, and an old coffee shop called Maybell's. It was the sort of place where everything, rumors, advice about fixing a roof, who was sick, and who got better, got passed across a mug of black coffee. Eli parked his truck on the patch of dirt beside the shop and stepped inside to the chime of a small bell hanging on the wooden frame. The air was warm, but the eyes that turned toward him were colder than the mountain morning. An older man with silver hair and thick glasses glanced up, then bent back down to his cup. A woman carrying out a tray of pie froze half a second when she noticed the worn uniform coat Eli still wore. "Not from around here," the woman behind the counter said. "Not exactly unfriendly, not exactly welcoming." "No," Eli answered. "Just moved out to Foster Hill." The room went still. The soft sound of a spoon against a coffee cup seemed louder than it should. A young man at the counter looked up and quickly dropped his eyes again. Eli knew that silence. Not curiosity. Something else. Something the town didn't want dragged back into daylight. The weight of a ghost everyone recognized. The woman behind the counter gave a slow nod. "Who you looking for?" "I just want to know. Who lived there before? I found toys, some letters. No one ever came back for any of it." The old man coughed into his fist. The woman set her cup down. "You ought to ask Maggie Harlow. She handled the property out west of the ridge. She would have been the one with the papers." "Hey." That name dropped the mood down one more notch. Eli left the shop near midday. Maggie Harlow's office stood at the far end of the street, a white 2-story house with fresh paint on the porch columns that still couldn't cover the years on its bones. He walked up the steps and pressed the bell. The door opened to a woman who didn't look like she smiled much. Maggie Harlow, maybe past 60, her hair pinned neat, her eyes a pale grey like old ice. She wore a high-neck charcoal sweater and grey slacks, her back straight as a post, and she didn't move aside to let him in. "My name's Eli Turner," he said. "I just bought the Foster Hill farm. Folks said you might know a few things." "I filed the transfer, yes." She cut him off, her voice flat but clear. "But if you came here looking for a story, you ought to pick another place. There's no shortage of cheap land around here." Eli kept his voice even. "I'm not looking for stories, just trying to understand why it was left so fast." Maggie's eyes locked on his, hard as stone, steady, unblinking. "Some places aren't abandoned, Mr. Turner. They're forced quiet, and you're an outsider. My advice, keep it that way." The door closed in his face. No parting word, no hint of courtesy. Eli stood for a few moments, hand still on the keys in his coat pocket. The wind picked up, tugging loose a few notices taped to her front door, flapping them until they tore away. He turned back toward his truck, but the words stayed in his head, circling, forced quiet. When he reached his truck, he found a slip of paper tucked beneath the wiper. The wind had curled its edges, but the message was plain. "If you don't stop, you won't be the only one to pay." That night, the wind came early. The sky looked like someone had pulled a sheet of lead across it. No moon, no stars, just the gusts slamming against the windows as if to remind Eli that this house wasn't meant to hold people for long. He had locked every door, wedged bricks against the sills, but there was still that feeling something wasn't right. Like the walls, the air, maybe even the dirt under the foundation, were holding their breath, waiting. Eli sat in the first-floor room, his hand resting on his thigh, his pistol on the table with the safety off, close enough to grab in half a second. That wasn't fear. It was muscle memory. When you live miles from the nearest cop or gas station, when nobody knows your name or would bother to come if they did, you learn to expect anything. Close to 2 in the morning, just as sleep was starting to edge in, he heard it. A sound light as a footstep in the hall beyond the kitchen. Not hurried, not heavy, just one step, then another, then silence. Eli's eyes opened, and his hand closed on the pistol. He held his breath, his ears stretching tight like wire. He'd lived through the shuffle of boots in the barracks, the drag of shoes through desert brush, the crunch of an enemy just outside the line. This was the same kind of sound. He clicked on the flashlight, beam cutting through the hallway. Nothing there. But the back kitchen door, the one he had bolted, stood slightly open, just enough for the wind to slip in and whine against the hinge. Eli rose, moving toward it, one slow step after another, gun gripped firm. The kitchen bulb flickered once and went dead. He pulled the door wide and threw the beam outside. The grass bent the same as in daylight. No fresh tracks. But at the threshold, right under the light, was a scratch. Thin, drawn out like someone had dragged a fingernail along the wood and stopped. Not deep, but new. Eli crouched, touched it. The shavings were dry, but the cut was raw. He shut the door hard, fastened the lock, then braced it with 2 boards crossed like a barricade. After that he dug out his old phone, set it on the table, switched it to record. Not for anyone else, just for himself. Proof that this wasn't a dream. The wind outside howled like a bent whistle. Eli sat back down, eyes fixed on the door, cold slipping in through the seams of the boards, through his jacket, straight into memory. Nights buried in hot sand, enemy boots passing close enough he could count the seconds between breaths. By 3 in the morning, sleep tugged at him again. That's when he heard the small click upstairs. Not a step this time. A door hinge, slow and deliberate. A bedroom door opening. Eli jumped up, flashlight cutting the staircase, pistol drawn, and safety off. The beam showed nothing, only a thin draft drifting down the steps, carrying with it a faint, burnt smell. Something between melted wire and singed hair. He climbed 3 steps. Light spread across the floorboards above. And then it came. Behind him, up near the attic, 3 knocks. Steady. Hollow. They didn't stop there. A voice followed, rough and rasped. Low but plain. No one is allowed to stay. Is there you? The next morning, pale sunlight pushed through a faded curtain, but Eli kept his eyes on the ceiling. He'd been lying there for nearly an hour, still hearing that voice from the night before. No one is allowed to stay. It didn't feel like a dream. It felt like something that had been waiting in that house long before he showed up, and now it had found a way to speak. He got up, made coffee with bottled water, splashed his face in an old enamel basin, and set his mind firm. He had to search deeper. Something was wrong here, and Maggie Harlow's hands weren't clean. He started upstairs in the room where the door had opened the night before. The mattress was thick with dust, but he saw where it had been brushed aside, as if someone had sat there not too long ago. In the corner, a small bookshelf eaten through by termites, the wood warped. Eli pried it loose, slipped a hand inside, and pulled out a small wooden box. The lock rusted but not fastened shut. Inside were folded sheets of paper, a brown-covered notebook, and a faded photograph. He opened the notebook. The first page, written in a child's shaky hand, Hannah's diary, 1999. If you're reading this without asking, you're bad. That name, Hannah, was the same as the one he'd seen in the little exercise book under the child's bed a few days back. Eli sat on the edge of the mattress and began to read. The early pages were ordinary enough meals, Miss Porter at school, games with a cat named Bruno. But around page 13, the tone changed. She said if I don't stay quiet, she'll lock me up. She took my doll and called me a liar. But I wasn't lying. I saw the man pulled into the well. I saw it. The next page was a crude crayon sketch. A house, a well with a tiny figure falling in. Beside it, a dark shape with hair pulled into a bun. And in the bottom corner, scribbled in a shaky tilt, M.H. Eli stared at those letters. M.H. Maggie Harlow. He turned more pages. Many had been torn out, only ragged edges left. On the last one still attached, ink smudged across the paper. If anyone hears me, please tell. Don't let me disappear like he did. His hand tightened around the diary. Anger ran hot through his spine. What had they done here? Maggie's name in a child's diary wasn't chance. Eli could see her face again, that cold steel stare, the warning in her voice. He stood, slipped the notebook into his pack, and locked it down. No one could know he'd found this. Not yet. But it meant he wasn't just some stranger moving in to be left alone. The moment he crossed that line, he knew he was being watched. He had barely reached the bottom of the stairs when the sharp blare of a horn cut through the silence outside. Through the window he saw it, a black SUV parked tight against the fallen fence. The driver's window slid down, and there she was, Maggie Harlow, looking straight at him, not blinking, not moving, not smiling. Eli didn't take his eyes off Maggie in that black SUV until she finally turned the wheel and rolled away, her rear tires grinding hard against the gravel at the gate. That visit wasn't chance. She knew what he was digging for. And now she'd come to the farm herself, just to make sure he knew he was being watched. The rest of the afternoon passed in silence. Eli kept his routine steady, raking dead leaves, mending the sagging fence, checking locks one by one. Nothing reckless, nothing to show he'd rattled. But when the daylight sank into dusk, he shut himself inside, locked the door, lit the desk lamp, and pulled the notebook from his pack. The last page still carried its crease. He wrote down everything he had found, the details in Hannah's diary, the scrawled MH, the scratch mark on the back doorframe. Old combat habits stuck with him. You don't trust memory. You trust ink on paper. The phone rang a little after 8. No caller ID. Eli let it buzz twice before picking up. "Mr. Turner," a woman's voice said. Slow, careful. Like she was reading from a script she'd rehearsed. "I thought we'd already made things clear, but you strike me as the kind of man who doesn't take warnings." He didn't answer right away. The voice was Maggie's. Rough, dry, stripped of emotion, yet every word cut sharp. "You call my house and don't even give your name," he said finally, eyes on the slit of curtain at the window. "I don't need to introduce myself. All you need to know is that the past in Foster Hill isn't yours. It doesn't belong to you, and it's not meant to be poked at." "And then who does it belong to?" Eli shot back, his voice level. "The child who wrote in that diary? The man dragged into the well? Or the one who begged in a letter not to be silenced again?" There was a long pause. Then her tone shifted, dropping low, like she was whispering a secret meant for the ears of a dying man. "You think you're the first one to dig up the past? Others tried. They had the same look in their eyes you do. And where are they now? They're not here anymore." Click. Deadline. Eli sat there a moment, then stood, slid every bolt, checked every lock again. In his head the pieces lined up. A girl named Hannah. The initials MH. A diary torn apart. A threat. A black SUV. Now a phone call from the very person with the reach to cover it all. He knew this feeling. He'd known it in Fallujah, in Helmand, in those villages where silence weighed heavier than gunfire, where people avoided your eyes and never spoke more than 3 words. Places where something was wrong, and silence was how you stayed alive. He pulled out a handheld recorder from his pack, batteries still full, set it on the windowsill aimed at the backyard. Then he took an old phone, no SIM card, but the camera worked and slid it into a crack in the wall across from the entry. If someone came in the night, at least he'd have a shadow to follow. He hadn't survived 2 wars to die from a threat whispered in a town of 300. If Maggie thought fear would make him walk away, she'd picked the wrong man. Around midnight, as he scribbled in his notebook, the ceiling light flickered. Not the power, just his lamp. 3 times it blinked, then blacked out. When he raised his eyes to the bathroom mirror, the words were there, dripping faint as if written with a wet fingertip. Stop. 3 in the morning, Eli sat in the kitchen with a cup of cold coffee in his hand, his eyes still fixed on the bathroom mirror where the words, "Stop," had appeared, and faded only minutes before. He'd managed to snap a picture of it with his old phone, saved it to the memory card. No knocks tonight, no footsteps, just the light flicker, and that warning, clearer than anything Maggie had thrown his way. Eli had no doubt anymore. Someone or something had once lived, or been kept, inside this house. And if he wanted the truth, he'd have to go deeper, into the one place no one wanted to go, the basement. By late afternoon, he set to work in the small storage room beside the kitchen, where a heavy wooden door had been nailed shut under a torn rug, covered in dust thick as ash. 2 crossbeams nailed across it, half splintered but still holding. It was obvious somebody had wanted this door hidden. Eli took up a crowbar, pried the nails out one by one, pulled away the broken boards, then wrenched the door open. The smell hit him first: mold, rust, and something sharp, like rodent droppings. A set of wooden stairs led down, warped and spongy, but still strong enough to take his weight. He tied the flashlight to his hand, slung his pistol across his back, and started down. The basement was small, ceiling low, stone walls damp with moss and water stains. In the corner stood a rusted metal rack draped with canvas. On it sat an old ammo box, a steel suitcase, and a dark wooden chest with a lock across it. He went through them one by one. The chest opened easy, filled with personal things. A family photo album yellowed with age, snapshots of a little girl clutching a cat, a young mother smiling faintly, a father standing behind with his hand on her shoulder. No names written anywhere, but Eli knew that face the girl was Hannah. Same curls, same striped red dress he'd seen drawn in the child's diary. The suitcase held papers, birth certificates, school records, car registrations. Every one of them stamped with the name Harlow. A family had lived here once, long before Maggie's name wound up on the auction ledger. He cracked open the ammo box. No weapons. Instead, a stack of medical files, notes scribbled in a doctor's hand. Female child, Hannah H. Prolonged allergic reactions. On the last page, a red line drawn heavy. Do not release. Private isolation required. Eli straightened, his head buzzing. This hadn't been some family walking away. They'd been erased. Hannah had been sick. Someone in the system had worked to cover it. This was no abandonment. This was a scrubbed history. And at the top of it sat Maggie Harlow. As Eli turned to leave, his flashlight caught the far wall. He froze. Scraped into the stone itself, hidden beneath years of dust and moss, were words cut jagged with some sharp tool, crude, trembling lines, but still plain enough to read. We are still down here. 2 days after Eli found the words carved in the basement wall, a heavy envelope showed up at his door, hand-delivered from a law office in town. Harlow, Price and Denton LLP stamped clear across the top. Inside was an official notice from Maggie Harlow's attorney. It claimed that Eli Turner had trespassed into restricted property, rifled through personal belongings not covered by the current deed, and violated a silence clause buried in the fine print of the auction transfer. Attached was a copy of the clause itself, words printed in faint type most folks would have skimmed over. The buyer may not disclose, exploit, or transmit any information related to prior occupancy of the premises, including but not limited to physical property or matters concerning past residents. A trap, plain as day, and Eli had stepped in it the first moment he started clearing out the house. That morning, he was mowing the patch of grass out front when the sheriff's cruiser rolled up quiet to the gate. Sheriff Malloy didn't step out. A young deputy did, holding a folded summons, his voice stiff as stone when he handed it over. No shouting, no cuffs, just the cold weight of procedure. Eli read the paper and didn't need anyone to spell it out. This was Maggie's warning shot. She didn't just own land. She owned lawyers, police, and every hidden line at the bottom of the page. When threats didn't scare you, she reached for the kind of power that pressed down heavier than a rifle barrel. The law. Eli walked back inside and set the stack of papers on the table. His pulse thudded in his chest, not from fear, but from the anger boiling up. He'd faced rifles, roadside bombs, ambush fire, yet somehow a red stamp and a lawyer's signature brought the kind of suffocation that made his fists itch to smash something. But he didn't. He sat down, flipped open his old laptop, and started planning. He knew he couldn't go public with the evidence. Not when Maggie had the law in her pocket. He needed a new approach, indirect, invisible, like the work he'd done in Iraq, slipping through towns with no maps, no allies, and nothing but his own wits to get him back out. He bought an external drive, backed up everything, photos of the diary, shots of the basement, the carving in the stone. He mailed a copy to a safe address in the next county under a false name. Then he set 3 hidden cameras, one on the staircase, one aimed at the backyard, and one tucked beneath the eaves watching the front gate. That night, he sat at the table whispering into a recorder. Every step he'd taken, every sign he'd gathered, all logged in a low voice that carried no hesitation. His words were steady, but under them burned, the heat of anger pressed down like iron in a forge. He wasn't backing off, not with proof in hand, not knowing people had died in that house. Later, while adjusting the camera under the porch eave, Eli noticed something odd in the daytime footage. Around noon, while he'd been inside, a figure appeared at the edge of the property line. A man in a brown coat, standing still by the boundary marker for nearly 3 minutes before slipping out of frame. The strange part, the motion sensor never recorded a thing. The night wind hammered the tin roof, but Eli didn't feel the cold. He stood behind the upstairs curtain, eyes fixed on the dark stretch of front yard. Hours earlier it had felt safe. Now it didn't. A faint click came from the direction of the shed, not wind this time. His porch camera sent a motion alert right as the clock struck midnight. He grabbed the monitor and hit play. The small screen showed a figure, thin frame, straight posture, walking across the grass with the calm of someone just checking their own garden. No mask, no attempt to hide. And when the camera zoomed in, Eli saw her face, Maggie Harlow. She walked straight to the north fence where Eli had hammered up a private property sign the day before. In her hand was a machete, and with 3 slow swings, she split the board clean like it was a dead branch. No rush, no fear. When she was done, she turned her face toward the camera, staring straight at it. No pretense anymore. Eli pressed record on the device, then reached under the chair for the pistol he kept boxed there. He didn't step outside. He wasn't stupid. A woman like Maggie wasn't there to brawl. She was there to deliver a message. And he needed it on tape. 2 minutes later, she circled toward the back porch. Something heavy slammed against the rear door glass, shattered loud across the kitchen tiles. Then her voice came, not raised, but sharp enough to cut through the wind. Eli Turner. Next time it won't be glass. It'll be your boy. Eli's finger tightened on the trigger. Samuel, his son, lived with his mother 1 state over. But Eli knew Maggie wasn't bluffing. She knew things. And once family was dragged into it, the line had been crossed. He backed away, rewound the footage, saved the clip to his hard drive. Maggie never tried to come in. She did exactly what she came for. Force his hand, see if he'd break. And then she left. No tire tracks, gate untouched. Like she'd been a ghost except for the broken glass at his feet and the evidence in his hands. Eli set to work, moving every piece of proof to a backup card. He wrote a letter by hand to an old friend who'd once served in the federal office, a man who owed him his life back in Iraq. Just 1 line. I don't need you to show up. I just need a lifeline if this blows. He sealed it with photos of Maggie, the recording of her threat, and arranged for a private courier in the morning. The wind outside howled, but now it sounded different, like the whistle of a war you couldn't see. One fought not with bullets but with law, with fear, and with words thrown at midnight. Eli wasn't backing off. Not tonight. Not ever again. He was locking away the backup drive when the phone rang. No number, no ID. He answered. On the line, a man's voice, low and unfamiliar. She's not working alone. The next morning, Eli walked into the Braxton County Records office with his collar pulled high and an old cap pulled low, doing everything he could not to be noticed. He didn't sign his real name, didn't leave a trail in the logbook. Every move was careful, precise, the way he used to operate on infiltration runs overseas. He wasn't here for gossip. He needed records, paper with ink on it, something that could force Maggie out of the shadows. It took him nearly 3 hours of digging through land files older than the year 2000 before he found what he was after. The folder was wedged between 2 unrelated markers, like it had been hidden there on purpose. The label read, Emergency Transfer, Harlow Family Plot, Code 17B, Foster Section. The first owner listed was Daniel Harlow, living with his wife Esther and their daughter Hannah. The transfer date, October 19th, 1999. The cancellation date, October 28th, that same year, just 9 days apart. A note scrawled on the margin made the hair rise on the back of Eli's neck. Owner unavailable to sign. Legal proxy assigned in his place. Maggie Harlow. He sat back, jaw tightening. Maggie hadn't just been involved. She had signed on behalf of her own family and then sold the land out from under them. The next page stopped him cold. A report from a local social worker, no file number, just an internal stamp. Minor female, Hannah H., reported absent from school beginning first week of October. Parents, unreachable. Home visit yielded no response. House showed signs of vacancy, some belongings still present. Last sighting by locals, evening of October 6th. And that was it. No follow-up. No police action. No court file. Just silence. Eli photographed every page, backed them up, sent a copy to his safe drop. As he walked out of the archive, his pulse was fast, but his stride stayed steady. This wasn't suspicion anymore. This was evidence. That night he sat alone in the kitchen, replaying Maggie's voice from the phone. Next time it won't be glass. It'll be your boy. Then he opened his laptop, typed in his password, and created a file. Case, Harlow, Archive, Zip. Underneath, he added a single line. If I disappear, forward to FBI, Seattle office, contact, Claire Mendoza. In 0. But before he could hit save, the mouse jolted, the screen shook, then froze. No keys responded. A single line appeared across the center of the monitor, glowing in red. You know too much. Samuel showed up at the farm on Saturday morning, just like they'd planned. He carried a small bag with canned food, a change of clothes or two, and that uneasy look he never managed to hide. Eli hadn't told him much over the phone, just that he needed to get away from his mother's place for a few days. The moment the boy stepped onto the yard, he sensed it. The air was heavier here, thick, like every breath was being measured by unseen eyes. The morning passed with father and son walking the property. Eli pointed out where the cameras were hidden, how the infrared tripwires worked, the spots you could watch without being seen. Samuel had always thought of his old man as just another veteran trying to make it through the days, but not today. Today, he saw something else, a soldier preparing for battle. By late afternoon, Eli led him down into the basement. He wanted Samuel to know where certain files were hidden, what places needed protecting if things ever went bad. They had just reached the bottom step when a crash thundered overhead. The basement door slammed shut. Eli lunged up the stairs, pounded on the wood. No good. Someone had locked it from outside. He dropped back down, pulled his phone, but the signal was dead. No bars, no GPS, jammed. Samuel's eyes widened, panic creeping in, but Eli's voice stayed level. It's all right. This isn't the first time I've been locked in somewhere, and it sure as hell won't be the first time I get out. He began checking the walls, testing every joint for weakness. The west side had a sagging foundation, a crack wide enough for a wrist, with a metal bar they could break through. Problem was no bar in sight, until Eli flipped an old table and found, bolted underneath, a rusted metal pipe. Looked like it had once been the handle of an ammo crate. Samuel helped, taking turns as they wedged the pipe into the crack, prying at the bricks. Every 10 minutes Eli stopped, head tilted, listening. On the third pause, he heard it. The sharp click of heels on the floorboards above. Not rescue. Whoever locked them in. Maggie's voice slid through the door like a blade. Eli Turner, you've gone too far. I gave you a chance to back away. Now there's no road left. The boy will be the last lesson. Eli said nothing. He tightened his grip on the pipe and swung hard at the wall. Brick shattered piece by piece. Cold air seeped through the outline of a narrow passage, some kind of old service tunnel leading toward the shed. Cramped, dark, damp, but a way out. Samuel crawled first, Eli close behind. They clawed through 30 yards of stone and dirt, shoulders scraping, knees cut raw. At the end, Eli drove his shoulder into a rotting plank, and it splintered open. They spilled onto the damp earth behind the shed. The sky above was black, an owl calling somewhere far off. No one waiting, no trap sprung. But it wasn't over. Eli pulled Samuel to his feet, brushing the mud off his jacket. The boy's eyes were fixed on the house. The lights inside had flicked back on. The front door hung wide. And framed in it stood a man Eli had never seen before, a double-barrel shotgun cradled in his hands, turning slowly toward them. Eli pulled Samuel down behind a rotted crate by the east fence, both of them holding their breath. The man with the shotgun walked straight into the farmhouse, never glancing their way. He didn't raise the weapon, didn't fire a shot, but every step sent a message clear as daylight. He was there to take control. Maggie wasn't hiding behind lawyers or paperwork anymore. She'd stepped onto the field herself. Eli knew what that meant. The first round was hers. He had gotten out, sure, but the original records, the Harlow files he'd risked weeks digging up, were gone. The USB drive, the memory card from his laptop, even the hard drive he'd tucked away in the attic, all stripped clean. Maggie hadn't needed to torch the house. She'd only needed 2 minutes inside to erase him. And she had done it. That night, Eli drove Samuel out of Foster Hill, taking the back trails north to avoid the highway cameras. They pulled into a rest stop far from town. Samuel fell asleep in the back seat, clothes still dirty, his head resting on his own backpack. Eli sat in the driver's seat, opened his battered notebook, and wrote 3 words for the first time. They will strike back. He no longer believed evidence alone would win. Not in this town. Not with Maggie holding cops, lawyers, and armed men in her pocket. He needed something she couldn't bend public eyes, press, or at least a witness no one had bought off. The next morning, Eli made a few quiet calls. He didn't ask for favors. He just asked, who still had an old tape recorder? Who knew how to pull a phone signal off the grid? Who could trace the ID of a device that had been killed remotely? He would rebuild from the ground up. And this time, nothing would sit in one place. Every picture, every file, every recording would be split apart and stashed with different people in different towns. If one piece fell, the others would hold the line. That night, while Samuel slept in a cheap rented room, Eli drove back to Foster Hill alone. He didn't step inside, didn't touch the lights. He only bent down at the side wall and clipped a small device into the breaker box, an auto cutoff switch. If anyone tried to rig the power or smash the circuits, the signal would jump to a server run by an old buddy in another state. The house itself was becoming a trap. On the way back, Eli stopped at the dirt track that marked the edge of the old Harlow land. He stared out across the field where barns had once stood, now just a slab of brick and weeds. To the eye, nothing. But Eli carried the old maps in his head. Beneath that ground lay a reservoir, once for water, maybe for something else. He pulled a folded chart from his coat, one he'd lifted from the archive office. On the back, in shaky handwriting, someone had left a note. If anyone survives, they will leave a sign here. Eli flicked on his flashlight. The beam ran over the bricks, uniform, seamless except one in the middle. It bore a faint carved mark, the letter H overlaid on a triangle, and beside it, in faded red ink, the words, "Second entrance use only if absolutely necessary. Ends." Eli met Sheriff Howard at a gas station on the edge of town. the kind of place where a faded sign half-covered a diner that smelled of grease and weak coffee. He picked noon on purpose, when the crowd would be thin. He ordered his coffee black and waited. Howard showed right on time, in plain clothes, a ball cap pulled low, pistol clipped behind his back out of habit. His eyes scanned Eli the way a cop studies a report, measured, cautious, never jumping ahead. "Not many folks remember me here," Eli said to break the silence. Howard's mouth lifted at one corner. "I do. Fallujah, 2006. You dragged me out of that house while rounds were chewing through the windows." Eli gave a slight nod. "Now I need you to do it again. Only this time, what needs pulling out is the truth." He didn't waste time. He laid it all out: the Harlow files, the disappearance of Hannah's family, Maggie signing the papers, the threats that had come both in court filings and in the middle of the night. He slid across copies of photos, the audio of Maggie's voice promising his son would be next, and the old map marked with the symbol for the second entrance. Howard sifted through each piece. His face didn't flinch, but his fingers tapped the rim of his cup, steady, quiet. "I believe you, Eli, but listen close. Maggie's wired into the prosecutor's office. One of my lieutenants used to serve as bodyguard for her father. You cross the wrong man, they'll bury you under every charge they can conjure. I'm not asking for you to go public," Eli said, voice calm but heavy. "I need to know who's clean, who'll follow a quiet order, and when I move, I need to know I won't take a bullet from behind." Howard thought for a long beat. 3 names: Torres, Diggs, and Riley. First 2 can't stand the land barons. The last one lost a brother in a so-called suicide after pushing a case against Maggie. "I'll talk to them myself." "No radios," Eli told him. "Signals only. I'll send a flare from the old pump station if I need backup." Howard gave a firm nod, then lowered his voice, eyes sliding toward the window. "Maggie knows we met. Don't kid yourself. From here on, every move you make is under glass. How much time you figure you got?" Eli didn't hesitate. 3 days, then I strike. I've spread the original data around, but if she figures out who's holding which piece, someone's going to end up in the ground. I need her dragged into the light before she drags anyone else down that well. Howard squeezed Eli's shoulder before leaving. "This time I don't walk away." That night back at the farm, Eli checked the feeds and froze. One of the 3 cameras had been twisted, lens pointed straight at the sky. Not wind, not some animal. Someone had stood right in front of it and touched it. He pulled the card, ran the footage. Around half an hour after he'd left the diner, there it was, a blurred, shaky frame of a man standing square to the camera. Grey shirt, no mask, face clear. He didn't move, just stared into the lens. And in his right hand was Samuel's wallet. Eli didn't call the cops. The memory card with the image of that stranger holding Samuel's wallet was copied 3 times and sent off in 3 different directions. After that, Eli shifted into hunting mode. There was no more doubt Maggie had moved past legal threats. Now she was making her play in the open. He began tailing her. Not the sloppy kind you see in movies. Eli had been trained to slip through alleys in Ramadi without leaving a shadow. Each day he picked a different hour, always keeping 3 to 5 blocks back, using an old cell phone rigged with a zoom lens and a pair of binoculars. Maggie Harlow's office sat on the 2nd floor of an old brick building, 3 windows, blinds drawn tight all week. But on Wednesday afternoon, one of them cracked open. Through that gap Eli saw she wasn't alone. At least 2 men in plain clothes moved boxes around, both wearing gloves, faces hidden from view. Eli snapped frame after frame. He didn't need close-ups. He wasn't chasing identities. He needed proof of what they were doing. The next day Maggie left her office with a slim file bag and walked toward the abandoned warehouse at the end of Downer Street, a property once owned by another family before being auctioned off back in 2004. Eli parked on a ridge across the way, pulled out his telephoto lens. Inside a light glowed. She wasn't stashing files. She was reviewing them. Half an hour later, when Maggie drove off, Eli slipped in through a rotted back door. No alarms tripped. Inside the main hall he froze. On the far wall stood a massive corkboard, covered edge to edge with old photographs. Dozens of black and white shots mixed with color prints, all faces from around Foster Hill families of the Harlows, the Nolans, even a boy named Matthew Gordon, whose name Eli had seen once in a missing person file dated 2001. Every photo carried a mark, numbers, dates, some slashed with red X's across the faces, others bore notes scrawled beneath. Transfer Sector 12, removed from program, and worse, medical note, non-recoverable. That wall wasn't a scrapbook, it was a ledger of control. Eli photographed everything: the board, the corners of the room, every folder stacked nearby. He didn't dig deeper, didn't disturb a thing. The chain of evidence had to stay clean, in case this ever reached a courtroom. Back home, he uploaded every shot to a secure server. Then he sat at his tape recorder, hit record, and spoke low and steady for 3 minutes. "This is the turn. The target is confirmed. The system break begins in 24 hours. Just as he clicked it off, the landline in the living room rang. Nobody had that number except those who knew the code. Eli lifted the receiver, saying nothing. On the other end, a voicemail, rough, no hurry. I saw your camera feed at the warehouse. You don't have any time left, Turner. Tomorrow night they'll wipe it clean. And this time, Maggie doesn't just want silence. She wants you buried with the truth. By the time the sun was up, Eli knew the game had shifted. His old pickup sat in the gravel lot outside the motel, like a carcass gutted in plain sight. The windshield had been smashed with something heavy, the rear tires slashed open, and the ignition ripped apart piece by piece. Whoever had done it left no blood, no prints, and every camera that might have caught them had been blinded or cut. It wasn't a message anymore. It was the first real blow. He didn't bother dialing the sheriff's office. Howard had already warned him that Maggie had eyes inside the department. Any official report would get buried, rewritten until Eli looked like the town crank making up stories. Instead, he pulled out the coded radio Howard had set him up with and keyed the red channel, a simple burst of static sent across to Diggs, Torres, and Riley, the only three Howard swore could still be trusted. No call for backup, just a signal, a way of saying the storm had broken. At 10 that morning, Samuel was gone. His bed at the motel was empty, sheets still warm. His phone, powered off. The clerk at the front desk remembered only a man in a white shirt who had walked in calm as you please, introduced himself as Samuel's cousin, and said there was an urgent family matter. No papers, no signature, no questions. And just like that, the boy was gone. Eli's hand closed tight around the worn backpack strap hanging from his shoulder. Inside his pocket he gripped the photo Samuel always carried, the one that used to sit in the boy's wallet, just a snapshot of him as a kid grinning crookedly. The same wallet Eli had seen in the stranger's hand on the grainy camera feed 2 nights earlier. The pieces fit now. Maggie didn't care about erasing history. She wanted leverage. Something to drag him out of position, to bait him into a single mistake. One shot fired too soon, one move too far, and then spin him as a lunatic vet, trying to murder the most respected woman in town. He left the motel with a borrowed car, circling back to Foster Hill through the dirt roads that cut behind the ridge. By the time he pulled up, the property was dead. Power lines cut, the generator in pieces. His data feeds dark. The house was nothing but a hollow shell now. What he had left was stripped down to the basics. A flashlight, a knife, an old map, and whatever memory years of war had left sharp inside him. That map, the one with the scrawled line that read, "Second entry," was no longer just a curiosity, it was the only path left. He moved to the ruins of the old stables, where the ground had long been flattened and covered with weeds. He got on his knees, pulling brick after brick until his fingers scraped steel. A hidden hatch, cold beneath the dirt. He wedged it open with the knife, and found a ladder leading down into the dark. The tunnel ran shallow and narrow, carrying him toward the warehouse where Maggie had once kept her files. Eli slipped in from the south wall, breathing through his teeth. The place had been stripped clean. The corkboard was gone, every photograph ripped down, every box removed. Nothing left but dust and echoes. He didn't expect to find records anymore. He was hunting for something else. 10 minutes of searching, and he caught it a sound behind a false wall, faint as a mouse, the scuff of shoes against cement. He levered his crowbar into a weak seam and cracked the plaster free. Behind it was a box of a room, barely wide enough for 2 men to stand shoulder to shoulder. Samuel was inside, hands tied, face pale but alive. The boy looked at him and didn't scream or sob, just whispered hoarse, "They didn't give me food all day." Int 5th. Eli cut him loose and pulled him close, running rough hands over his arms and ribs, checking for breaks, bruises, anything permanent. There was nothing but the hollow look in Samuel's eyes, and that was worse than any mark. He told the boy they were leaving, and together they crawled back through the tunnel, knees bleeding against the stone. They climbed up through the hatch into the night air. For a second Eli thought maybe, just maybe, they'd made it clean. Then the ground began to tremble. Engines, heavy, deliberate. 3 black SUVs rolling across the dirt from the direction of the farm, their headlights low but their engines loud enough to rattle his teeth. The doors opened in unison. Maggie Harlow stepped out first, dressed neat, a folder tucked under one arm like it was nothing more than another day at the office. But her eyes were locked on Eli, and her smile was thin as wire. Behind her, a man in a deputy's uniform climbed down, his hand already loosening the strap on his holster. Not Howard. The deputy. The second in command. Samuel gripped Eli's arm, his voice caught between a sob and a breath. Eli didn't move, didn't blink. He'd been here before, in alleys, in desert streets, in places where every inch of ground decided who walked away. But this wasn't Fallujah. This was his son's life. And Maggie Harlow had just moved the war into his front yard. Eli didn't run. He didn't shout. He just grabbed Samuel's wrist and pulled him down against the dirt embankment along the fence line. The ground was damp, cold, smelling of weeds and rust from the broken wire. Out front, 3 black SUVs lined up across the farm gate like a wall. Their headlights stayed dark, engines rumbling low, steady, like hounds waiting for a signal to strike. 6 men spilled out, each carrying a sidearm or a blunt weapon. They weren't dressed as cops or rent-a-guards, but their steps told the truth. This wasn't a gang of hired drunks. They were trained muscle men who moved with formation, who kept their eyes fixed forward, who knew exactly what they'd come for. At the center stood Maggie. She was upright, her grey coat brushing her knees, hair pinned tight at the back. She didn't yell orders, didn't raise her hands, just tilted her head toward the porch of the farmhouse. That was all it took. The deputy strode forward, drawing his pistol like it was a simple errand. His walk said it clear. Eli Turner was already dead. It was just a matter of sweeping the floor. But Eli wasn't backing off. His hands were empty, but his head was still wired with every lesson drilled into him across the ridges of Afghanistan. The way to let terrain fight for you, how to twist a weak hand into an advantage, how to make the enemy look the wrong way long enough for you to move. He tapped Samuel's shoulder, and the boy nodded, his eyes wide but steady. They crawled along the fence, bellies close to the ground, until Eli signaled to stop. 2 men were circling behind the barn. Eli's hand slid across the dirt, picking up a stone the size of a fist. With one quick throw, he sent it clanging against an old metal drum 20 yards off. The sound echoed sharp, bouncing off the barn wall. Heads whipped around, guns half raised. That heartbeat of confusion was all Eli needed. He dragged Samuel across the yard to the carcass of a pickup rusting at the tree line. Underneath that truck, he had stashed something weeks before, just in case. A sawed-off chimney pipe, hollow, with 2 glass bottles tucked inside, gasoline-filled, cloth wicks already soaked in oil, not meant to kill, just to buy distance. He pulled one out, struck his lighter, and with a grunt, sent it flying toward the fence. The bottle shattered, and flame whooshed up like a curtain, snapping across the night. Men shouted. One stumbled back, tripped, and went down hard. The deputy swung around, pistol raised, ready to fire. But Eli was already on him, rushing from the left. He drove a knee into the man's gut, ripped the pistol from his grip, and kicked it across the dirt before the man could breathe. The deputy folded, gasping like a fish. Samuel, God bless the kid, rushed from cover, grabbed a length of wood, and swung at the legs of another man. The crack sent the thug sprawling. Eli spun, his arm catching the full strike of a club. Pain shot up his shoulder, numbing his hand, but he didn't falter. He twisted, drove an elbow sharp into the attacker's throat. The man crumpled with a strangled gasp, down for good. Chaos tore across the yard. Flames licked higher, shadows flailed against the barn wall. And in the middle of it all, Maggie stood untouched. She hadn't moved, hadn't blinked. Her face was carved in stone, hatred, cold and unblinking. You think this is a victory? She spat, her voice cutting through the smoke. Every second is being recorded. You just assaulted law enforcement. Eli didn't answer. He didn't waste words. He pulled Samuel with him toward the farmhouse, shoved aside the busted floorboard, and dragged out the hidden cash, a canvas bag with the one last hard drive Maggie didn't know about. He slung it over his shoulder, yanked the old radio unit from the wall, and punched in the emergency code. Static hissed, the red light blinking. 2 minutes later, a pair of headlights appeared down the road. Sheriff Howard's patrol car. Relief should have come, but it didn't. Because from the tree line on the left, 4 more figures emerged, dressed head to toe in black, faces masked, not townsfolk, not deputies, outsiders, professionals. One of them wore medical gloves, and in his hand was a slim injector glinting under the moonlight. He didn't look at Eli. He didn't look at Howard's cruiser. He walked straight, steady, toward Samuel. Eli's chest locked tight. He shifted Samuel behind him, feet set in the dirt, the flames crackling at his back, the hard drive heavy on his shoulder. He'd faced warlords, insurgents, men who prayed for death just to take him with them. But this was different. This was his boy. And now the line wasn't between nations or law or land. It was right here, cut into the dirt of Foster Hill. The SUVs idled, the fire snapped, Howard's siren wailed in the distance. The men in black spread wide, flanking. Samuel's breath hitched against Eli's spine. And Maggie, still in the yard, smiled with the satisfaction of someone who believed the board was already set, the pieces already hers. Eli lowered his stance, fists curled, eyes burning steady, no running, no surrender. Tonight, the farm itself would decide who walked out alive. Sheriff Howard and 2 of his men pulled Eli and Samuel out of the farm, just minutes before the strangers reached the gate. No gunfire, no pitched battle. But everyone knew 10 more minutes, and things would have ended differently. The sheriff drove them deep into the woods, down a forgotten road, to a cabin owned by a widowed veteran no one visited anymore. It was the kind of place you only found if someone wanted you to. Quiet, hidden, safe enough for the moment. Inside that cabin, for the first time in days, Eli had space to breathe. He set his bag on the worn wooden table, unzipped it, and pulled out the last drive he'd saved, the one hidden beneath the stone by the dry well. He hooked it to the old laptop Howard's man had provided. Files loaded slow, the screen flickering in the dim light. Not just images, not just video. There was a bundle of papers, yellowed with time, sealed in plastic. Tucked alongside was a notebook, bound in faded leather, handwriting neat and slanted. The first page carried one line only. "If someone finds this, please read it all before destroying it." Signed, Esther Harlow. Eli turned the pages carefully. The diary spilled the life of a family he'd only known through whispers. Esther wrote about her husband, Daniel, injured in a work accident that no one explained. He'd been sent home to recover, weak but alive. Then Maggie appeared already, circling like a hawk, offering to help, to manage the property until Daniel was strong again. But 3 weeks later, Daniel was gone. Not dead, not buried, just gone. No hospital record, no death certificate. Only Maggie's voice, cold and firm, insisting that Daniel had walked out. From there, the pressure mounted. Esther wrote how Maggie cornered her into signing paper after paper, authorizations, transfers, powers of attorney she barely understood. Then, in one single night, she and her daughter Hannah were forced out. No neighbors came, no one asked. And from that night on, Esther said, they vanished from the life they had known. The final entry was a letter, scrawled in shaky hand. "I don't know how long we'll survive. I don't know if Hannah will even remember her father. But if someone reads this, please tell her she did not imagine it. She saw the man dragged into the well. I saw it too." Eli sat still, hands pressed to the leather cover, his jaw set tight. Samuel sat close, not speaking. The boy wasn't the frightened child of a few days ago. His eyes had changed. They carried something harder than fear, understanding. Together they opened the small tin box that had come with the diary. Inside lay a child's necklace, tiny letters etched to spell Hannah. There was a Polaroid photograph, Daniel Harlow standing beside the well, his face lined but smiling, and a worn employee badge from a place neither of them had heard before. Redbrook Pharmaceuticals. Eli frowned. That name hadn't shown up in any property record, any police report, any archive. Later, digging deeper, he found scraps online. Redbrook had once run a pharmaceutical test facility outside Braxton in the early 90s. Then, without noise, the company folded. Budget cuts, the official story said. No medical records, no community notes, nothing tying it to the missing. Just blank space, as if the town itself had agreed to forget. But now Eli had more than rumors. He had images. He had a diary. He had names, dates, places. This wasn't just Maggie anymore. It was bigger, older, a structure buried 20 years deep, built on real people, real blood. And the more he read, the clearer it was. Local officials hadn't just looked away. They had been complicit. He knew then he couldn't keep this locked in a drawer. He couldn't gamble that one raid, one false move would erase it all. He uploaded everything to a public encryption platform, setting the failsafe. If his signal went dead for 12 hours straight, the files would broadcast automatically. Pictures, testimony, maps, every name. Out in the open, when he closed the laptop, the cabin was quiet, only the creak of trees outside. Samuel stood, walked onto the porch, eyes on the dark line of pines at the edge of the clearing. His voice was calm, too calm for his years. "Dad," he said, pointing toward the trees. "There's someone standing out there." Eli didn't run anymore. He knew this moment wasn't about survival, it was about ending things. Ending them the right way. Ending them so no one else would be dragged into a well, so no child like Hannah would have to leave behind a desperate plea scrawled in a notebook buried under dirt. And most of all, so his son, Samuel, wouldn't grow up in a world where evil won just because it knew how to sign papers instead of fire bullets. That morning, Eli brought Samuel straight back into town. No more hiding, no more waiting in the shadows. They walked into the town square just as the Saturday market was in full swing. Everyone was there, the owner of Maybell's Cafe, farmers unloading produce, even the deputy sheriff who'd just been suspended pending an internal investigation. And Maggie was there too, standing front and center at a campaign table. A fresh banner hung behind her. Maggie Harlow, clean land, strong will. And Eli didn't speak right away. He placed Samuel behind a lemonade stand, making sure the town's security camera had a clear view of the square. Then he walked straight across the open space toward Maggie. No gun in his hand, no weapon at all, just a thin folder of papers and a USB drive hanging on a keychain. Maggie spotted him. For a flicker of a second, her composure cracked, but she covered it fast, lifting her chin as if she had expected him all along. "You still haven't learned your lesson, have you?" she murmured, low enough for the crowd not to hear, but close enough for Eli to catch the sour trace of blood beneath her perfume. Eli held out the USB. "On this drive is everything. Images of your control board from the old warehouse, Esther Harlow's confession, and documents proving Daniel never signed away that land." I've already sent copies to 3 newsrooms and to an independent legal team. But I didn't come here to throw you in jail. Maggie gave a short, sharp laugh. Then what are you here for? Eli locked eyes with her. To tell you it's over. You can still play the victim in front of these people, but your files will be stripped bare. Every family you made, disappear. Every child you marked, transferred. Every missing person swept under your carpet. It's all coming up to the surface. Her hands tightened, nails digging into her palms until her knuckles went white. You don't understand, she hissed. I didn't build this. I only kept it alive. If it collapses, it won't just be me who falls, it'll be dozens of others. People you don't want to cross. Including you, Eli Turner. What do you think they'll say when they dig into Fallujah? Should I remind them what you did there? Eli didn't blink. I killed men to save my brothers, but I never killed children to protect a piece of land. The silence that followed stretched like a wire ready to snap. People around the market began to take notice. Heads turned, phones lifted. The government camera on the courthouse roof tilted, locking onto them. Samuel stepped forward, coming to stand beside his father. In his hand he held the small necklace engraved with Hannah, the one they had found hidden with Esther's diary. He lifted it up, placed it firmly in Maggie's hand. You know what this is, don't you? Samuel's voice shook, but he didn't look away. And you know that little girl never went back to school, right? Maggie didn't answer. She turned her face slightly, as though the sight of the necklace burned her skin. But it was too late, everyone had seen. The mask slipped, the polish cracked. No lawyers to shield her. No private cameras to edit the story. Just the raw truth hanging in the air. Down the street, a patrol siren wailed, growing louder. 2 officers approached the square, weaving through the crowd. Eli didn't flinch. He faced them square on. I've got the originals, he said evenly. And I'm not running. If scenes. The officers moved toward Maggie. Hands went to cuffs. The crowd pressed in closer, whispers rising into a roar. For the first time, Eli saw something in Maggie's eyes he had never seen before. Not rage, not arrogance. Fear. And then Eli's phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out. A message from an unlisted number lit up the screen. Congratulations, but you've only touched the tip of the iceberg. The moment Maggie's wrists were cuffed and she was escorted out of the town square, Eli didn't turn back toward the farm. He didn't feel relief. Not really. This wasn't the kind of fight where you won and celebrated. This was the kind where you carried the weight of everything you'd uncovered and tried not to let it crush you. Instead of heading home, he put Samuel in the passenger seat of a borrowed car and drove straight to the communications outpost on the edge of town, where Sheriff Howard had arranged for a federal tech team to arrive the night before. It wasn't a fancy building, just an old brick utility station converted into a secure node, but inside it buzzed with quiet, tense activity. The kind of work done by men and women who knew every word, every file, every second of recording might change the future of the county. Eli laid everything down on the steel table, one piece at a time. The hard drive, the backup flash sticks, the handwritten notes, the photographs from the warehouse walls, Esther Harlow's letter, Hannah's diary, and the maps marked with red ink that showed where the records had been buried. Every item was logged, sealed with a digital tag, copied twice. Nothing doctored, nothing erased. One of the federal agents, a man in a simple shirt with lines carved deep into his face from too many years in the field, looked at Eli and asked, "Are you ready to testify if it comes to that?" Eli's answer was steady, his voice carrying the grit of someone who'd seen too much to be rattled anymore. "I'm ready to face whatever I need to face, as long as my boy doesn't have to grow up surrounded by people like Maggie Harlow." Within 36 hours, the story broke wide. 2 of the state's largest newspapers ran front-page spreads. The deputy sheriff was suspended, pending investigation into obstruction of justice. The county land office locked its doors, blinds drawn, as if silence might still protect them. And the town council called an emergency session, voices rising over each other about ethics, oversight, liability. Meanwhile, Maggie Harlow, once the financial and political anchor of Braxton, was now the center of a criminal probe that stretched beyond the county line. The charges were stacked like sandbags in a flood: document forgery, intimidation of witnesses, conspiracy in the abduction of a minor. Eli didn't feel triumph. No champagne, no applause. That kind of victory wasn't his. When he finally returned to Foster Hill with Samuel, they didn't storm the porch with joy. They moved quietly, boots pressing into the earth as if walking across a grave. They climbed the steps, sat side by side on the weathered boards, and looked out at the dry well, the place where it had all begun. And now, finally, it had been called what it was: a crime scene that someone had tried to bury. Under the shadow of the old oak tree, Eli pulled out a small slab of stone he'd shaped himself. With rough hands and a blade, he carved the words, steady stroke by steady stroke, "Hannah, you are not forgotten." He set it down by the well. Next to it he placed a glass jar, sealed against moisture, holding a copy of Esther's letter. It was proof and tribute both, that a family had once lived here, loved here, and had been destroyed here. Samuel didn't ask questions. He didn't need to. He stepped forward, unclasped Hannah's necklace from around his fist, and placed it inside the jar before his father sealed it back beneath the soil. No speeches, no ceremony. Just the simple act of a boy honoring another child he had never met but would carry with him always. Later that afternoon, as the first cold wind of the season swept through the trees, Samuel turned to his father. His eyes no longer held fear. They carried something harder, older. "You know this might not be the end, right?" Eli gave a small nod. "Things like this, they don't ever really end. But at least her name has been spoken. At least the truth isn't buried anymore." The federal team sealed off the entire Foster Hill site. Every inch of the ground was to be surveyed. Eli was allowed to keep the deed on one condition. The eastern acreage, where the underground facility had been, would undergo a full forensic and environmental sweep. Soil samples, water tests, biological traces. It wasn't closure, it was only the beginning. But it was the kind of beginning Eli had been fighting for. That night, after Samuel finally drifted into a heavy sleep in a borrowed bed, Eli sat alone with the silence of the house. His phone buzzed. No name, no number. He pressed it to his ear. There was no human voice. Only the high-pitched whine of a fax machine trying to connect, crackling in his ear like static from another world. Then a short recording began to play. Grainy, distorted, but clear enough that each word landed like a stone dropped into his gut. "Foster is just one point. Don't forget, Red Brook still has 2 facilities that haven't been found." Eli sat there in the dark, the sound still echoing even after the line went dead. He rubbed a hand over his face, the weight pressing harder than ever. For every secret he had dragged into daylight, there was still more waiting in the dark. And he knew what it meant. The fight wasn't over, not by a long shot. That fall, Eli made the choice to stay at Foster Hill. It wasn't because he thought the danger had passed. He knew better than that. It was because no one else could guard this ground like a man who had once seen it buried alive under silence. The federal agents pulled out after 6 weeks of digging, leaving behind yellow warning boards, a report almost 100 pages long, and a neat promise that they would review all Red Brook ties to dissolved residential areas. Eli didn't put much faith in that. He'd lived long enough to understand the cost of truth. When everyone else turns away, somebody still has to remain standing. Samuel stayed with him. Father and son hammered down new planks for the porch, replaced the rotten boards, rebuilt the east fence post by post. Eli never touched the ground around the well. He left it raw, the way it was, only raising a simple pine marker above it. He carved the words himself. Here, the truth was buried, and here, it was dug back up. Braxton wasn't quick to embrace them. In the grocery store, some people dropped their eyes when Eli passed. A few muttered thanks. Old women left flowers by Hannah's marker, never leaving a name. Eli didn't need forgiveness. He didn't need welcome mats rolled out for him. All he needed was to keep his promise. No one else would be forced into silence again. In December, he held a remembrance. No press, no cameras, just a handful of wooden chairs set in a circle around a fire, the smoke climbing into the cold night. On a hand-painted board were the names of every person who had once lived at Foster Hill. Some weren't even full names, just scraps of memory. Little girl, brown hair, 1998. Unknown man, transfer 12. Samuel stood up and read them one by one. Each name dropped like a stone into water, ripples of stories untold. Eli didn't read a speech. He just said one sentence when the fire burned low. "We don't need to know who they were to know they deserve to be remembered." The days that followed carried a kind of fragile rhythm. Samuel went back to school. Eli turned soil in the garden, his hands steady as he wrote down everything in a thick notebook. He mailed copies to a friend who worked at a paper in another state. He didn't want a book. He didn't want to sell the story. He just needed someone else to know, so that if he was gone, there'd still be proof this had happened. But ghosts don't leave just because you tell them to. Some nights, Samuel woke in a sweat, swearing he heard footsteps pacing the porch. Some mornings, Eli found his phone lit with blank messages from numbers he didn't recognize, and sometimes, tucked into the wooden mailbox at the end of the road, there were notes, scrawled in an unsteady hand. "Not everything has been dug up, Turner. Some things lie deeper." On that night, after Samuel finally drifted into sleep, Eli pulled the old map from the safe. The Red Brook chart, marked with 3 research points. Foster Hill was the first. The second had a red cross, cleared 2004. But the third, 40 miles south, was still marked in faint ink. Not yet accessed. Eli stared at that dot for a long time, his breath slow, heavy. Then he folded the map back up, slid it into the safe, and opened the notebook that never left his side. On the last page, he wrote one single line: "If I don't return, start there." Eli's story shows us that there are truths which, if no one dares to stand up, will stay buried forever, and in the end, it's always the vulnerable who pay the price. At any age, we are faced with the same choice: stay silent to keep ourselves safe, or speak up so the next generation can still hold on to what's right. The truth doesn't rise on its own. It needs someone willing to search for it, someone unafraid of being left out. And sometimes, it's that quiet persistence that brings about the biggest change. Are you watching this video in the morning or at night? Let me know in the comments. And if you'd like to keep hearing heartfelt stories of soldiers coming home, make sure to subscribe to the Soldiers Coming Home channel and stay with us.